Beyond Reason Radio.
So this, according to TheHill.com, North Korea signaled today, that it is still open to talks with the United States after President Trump canceled a planned meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. North Korean Vice Foreign Minister Kim Ki-gwan said in a statement broadcast by North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency that Pyongyang is willing to talk with the U.S. at any point. And that's what South Korean's news agency is reporting. The North Korean official said that Trump's decision to cancel the June 12th meeting in Singapore was unexpected, arguing the move was not in the world's interest. But he says, we reiterate to the U.S. that there is a willingness to sit down at any time in any way to solve the problem. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 9 p.m. tonight, right here, once again, on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. And if you want to call and comment, you can call 407-916-5400 or text to 23680. And the big news of the day, which I was just talking about there, that was breaking news from The Hill about an hour ago, is that North Korea, or President Trump, has decided to withdraw from the summit with North Korea. You know, I saw a funny cartoon by my friend Dana Summers, who does political cartoons for the Orlando Sentinel, also does the Bound and Gag cartoons, which are my favorite. He did a cartoon where it has Kim climbing up. It has a summit in the middle, a mountain, and it says summit, and it has Kim climbing up one side and Trump climbing up the other, and it's trying to reach the summit, and someone on the side goes, hopefully that's not a volcano up there about to explode. So I thought that was good. But a lot of news dealing with Trump wanting to pull out of the summit. I have a theory on all of that not really a lot of people are talking about, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. And by the way, you just heard his voice. We have Mr. Tom Benson producing as usual tonight. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing fine. We're on the verge of a holiday weekend. I think everybody's psyched for that.
Yeah, excited for the rain that we're going to get all weekend here in Orlando, Florida.
You can still grab your burgers, your steaks, and your hot dogs, you know?
Yeah, just eat them inside. I'm just going to sleep. That's usually what I do on holiday weekends. I just sleep the whole time because I don't get any sleep during the week. But there you go. So there's a lot of different things that I want to get to today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get to it pretty quickly. Later on in the show, Scott Maxwell, if you are listening from the Orlando area, he does columns for the Orlando Sentinel. And he has a column on Rick Scott and Rick Scott pushing term limits. And I actually tweeted out a response, and he responded to me on Twitter. And I want to talk a little bit about what he said there because it's really interesting what he's getting at. I don't know if I agree with everything he says, but he makes some good points about term limits that a lot of people aren't really saying. So we're going to get to that later in the show. We're going to get to the North Korea stuff later in the show. But I really need to start the show with this. The school shooting that happened in Texas at the Santa Fe High School on Friday last week. 10 people killed. Was it 10 kids?
9 students and
9 students and 1 teacher, right?
No, it was 8 students and 2 teachers.
That's right.
The one teacher was a
substitute.
Right.
And the shooter was going to kill himself. He said he chickened out of that.
Wonderful.
Yeah. There's a couple things. The first thing I want to say about it is, unfortunately, the reaction this time was different. And I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing, and I'll tell you why. I noticed that this time, when it happened, there wasn't as much shock, as much outrage as there has been in the past. And it seems that a lot of us are almost getting numb to this, that it's happened so much in the past couple of years, these mass shootings, that when it happens again, we're just kind of, man, it's awful, but it's not the same constant news coverage. We just kind of moved on. And in one sense, that's a bad thing because it shows how much this has been happening. But in another sense, it could be a good thing just because one of the reasons these shooters do it is for the attention. And by the constant news coverage of these events, that gives them the attention they want, and it fuels more mass shootings in the future. Because one thing that's going on with these school shootings especially, but the mass shooters as well, is that almost all of them seem to study the past ones, especially Columbine, because Columbine's what started this.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to go back and research all about those people who did them before. And it sort of inspires them to do a mass shooting as well. And right now, it's kind of ramped up into, I've been calling it an epidemic. An epidemic of mass shootings really is what's going on. A lot of the talk surrounds guns for political reasons, but the guns are not new. This kid in this recent one, he used a .38 revolver and a shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
Those guns have been around this country forever, since almost, for 100 years at least. I don't know when exactly, but they've been around for a long time. And these mass shootings haven't been happening. They weren't happening back then like they are happening now in schools. So you have to ask yourself, what changed? What is causing the current epidemic? Because there is, in this country right now, an epidemic of these. It is kind of overblown because the chances of you being shot in a school is still very, very low. And actually, gun crime as a whole is lower than it used to be just a few years ago. But there's no doubt that there's sort of a bandwagon effect where more and more people are inspired by the other ones, and it seems to be happening with higher frequency. And we have people wanting to blame the gun. But the guns are not new. The guns have been there forever. We want to ban certain kind of guns. Well, this kid used guns that all this gun control legislation that's been proposed in the last few months, none of it would have stopped this kid. And now one of the new things being proposed, well, you should have to lock up your guns. Apparently, this boy's father did. And the 17-year-old still found a way to get in and get in it. Because that's what happens.
Find the key,
They find a way.
Yeah.
And we're all looking at the symptom instead of the disease. But the one thing that I really thought of, the first thing that really came to my mind after hearing about this mass shooting, was actually a quote by John Adams. John Adams, second president of the United States, one of the founders of this country. He has a famous quote I'm going to read. You've probably heard it. It's quoted from a letter that he wrote to someone. He says, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, and lasciviousness would break the strongest cords of our Constitution, as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And that's the quote I was thinking of, that this country, what's going on with these kids right now, it's a crisis of morality and religion, in my opinion. We have freedoms in this country. One of those freedoms is the Second Amendment. One of those freedoms is the right to bear arms. It's in our Constitution. It's a well-known freedom that many people practice in this country. There are a lot of other freedoms as well. But when we keep looking at these mass shootings that are going on and some other gun violence in other areas in our country going on, mostly with gangs in inner cities and stuff like that, it makes me think that we have these freedoms, but we also have a responsibility to be a decent people who can handle these freedoms. We have a responsibility behind these freedoms. And we keep seeing what's going on with these kids and what's going on in our schools and what fuels these mass shootings. And there's a part of me that's thinking, we're not holding up to our end of the bargain as a people. that we're not holding up to our responsibility as Americans. That, yes, we have the freedom of the Second Amendment, but we are getting rid of morality and religion in this country, especially with young people. And because of that, we are not going to be able to have these freedoms for too much longer if we don't change course. Because freedom comes with responsibility. We are going to lose our... this is kind of a warning. But if we continue to get rid of faith and morality and not teaching our kids what needs to be taught and affecting our culture in negative ways, that is fueling these kids to want to do mass shootings. And there are many different reasons why these kids are doing it. A lot of it is, frankly, these kids cannot handle conflict. They don't know how to handle, they're not taught to handle conflict. They're not. So this kid, for instance, he had a girl break up with him or reject him.
He asked her out to the prom, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's what the mother is saying anyway. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't know how to handle that rejection. We're not taught to handle this anymore. And so we lash out like this. We go and we research other kids who were bullied and did mass shootings and stuff like that. And we're not taught religion anymore, the real value of human life like we used to be. Parents are not involved in their lives of their kids as much as they should be, or they're involved too much. Usually it's one or the other. And you just look at our overall culture, what's going on in politics, what's going on in social media, what's going on in the public square, all this division, all this nastiness. Our kids have now grown up with a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And all this is the culture. Everyone's talking about the government and what the government needs to do and legislation and securing our schools. And all of that is fine. But those are just effects of the debasement of our culture. And if we don't get back to going to the root of the problem, which is figuring out what in our culture is causing these kids to do these things, we're going to lose our freedoms because we are not going to be able to handle our freedoms. And that's kind of the point John Adams was making. Not specifically about that, but he's saying, look, our Constitution cannot get rid of the evilness that happens in humanity. Humanity needs a check on itself. Our government is not providing that check. What is going to have to provide that check against sinfulness in humanity is morality and religion in the culture. And we're losing that. And I guarantee you, the more we go down that road, we're going to lose more of that, more of our freedoms. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. There's a lot more to say about this. There was a column in Chicago Tribune that I shared on my Twitter. I'm going to read some of that as well. And some of the reaction to the school shooting just shows that our kids, a lot of these kids in Parkland, who everyone thought they're so smart, so articulate, they're making things worse. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee. We will be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
So Trump, shortly after the shooting happened, President Trump tweeted this out. He said, "School shooting in Texas, early reports not looking good. God bless all." And some of the kids got offended by this. I'm not sure why. They kind of misinterpreted what he was saying. He just basically was saying what was happening. But this shows part of the problem in our culture. Cameron Caskey's been one of the Parkland kids who was at the school today during the Parkland shooting. He's been very vocal about gun legislation and all that. He tweeted this out in response to Trump. He said, "Donald Trump does not care about school shootings. Donald Trump does nothing to stop school shootings. Don't talk to me about the Stop School Violence Act because that does nothing to stop school shootings. Donald Trump does not care about you or your kids getting shot." How do we expect to get anything done in this country with that kind of reaction. Donald Trump doesn't care about your kids getting shot? Really? You really believe that? So anyone who doesn't support your views on guns mean you don't care. This is part of the problem in our culture, not the solution. This kind of stuff, the reaction, and I understand he went through a tough thing, a really tough thing, but this kind of viciousness towards one another is not making our morality any better. And the morality and lack of religion is the problem, not the lack of gun control. Another example is David Hogg, another student from Parkland, who is now calling for a boycott of Publix and a quote-unquote die-in of Publix. Why? Because Publix decided to donate some money to Adam Putnam, who's running for governor of Florida. Adam Putnam happens to support the NRA, so in turn that means Publix must support the NRA and they need to be stopped. That's bullying tactics is what David Hogg does now. He wants to bully the opposition. He doesn't want to debate in the arena of ideas. He doesn't like that. He wants to bully you and protest you into submission. But who can blame him? Because that is what kids have been taught in today's world. That's all they know. These kids, have seen the past 10 years, this is what we do to every problem in this country. We just protest all the time. So he's just doing what he's been taught by the culture. And we're just making things worse. And they think government's going to be the answer. It's not. There's a great column from John Cass in Chicago Tribune. And I think he's mostly right. He starts the column by saying this. He says, I know 2 Greek American kids who brought shotguns to school. My brother Peter and me. This is what he said. There were 2 12-gauge shotguns. We were going hunting. He says, I suppose that sounds crazy after what happened at the Santa Fe High School in Texas. But he used, they were able to do that. Like I said, shotguns are not new. People used to bring shotguns to school, to campus, and it was fine because they'd go hunting afterwards. And they knew, they valued human life, and they knew you don't ever think about shooting other kids. You didn't think about that. He continues on, though. He says, by the way, the title of the article is School Shooters Are a Symptom of a Culture That Is Ill. It's what he said in the article. I agree with him. It's what I've been talking about. He says, I see them as symptoms of a culture that is seriously ill. Talking about the killers. The boy shooters filled with nihilism and despair, with hate, with little regard for the lives of others. But how were they formed? The boy shooters weren't hatched from dead eggs in an empty desert and raised up alone. We are all part of the culture. So we shape them, if not directly, then indirectly, as we pursue our own wants and desires. We till the ground for the young. Belief in God is mocked in our culture. Religion is belittled. Decency is snickered at. Tradition is deconstructed. Liberty is defined as doing what we want with our bodies. We glaze our minds with media and say hateful things to people we don't know by using our phones because we're right and those who disagree are wrong. Not just the shooters who believe that part, but these kids, Parkland kids, believe that. You shout against the people you disagree with. Our culture is ill in a lot of areas. He says, the wave of school shootings dating back to Columbine are telling us something, but we don't want to understand because understanding might make us guilty and get in the way of our true American pastime, seeking instant gratification. When Peter and I brought our guns to school, we weren't threats. We didn't have Twitter or Facebook. We were just 2 boys with a good pointing dog on a cool morning in autumn. We locked the shotguns in the trunk in the school parking lot and parked in the shade. It's just, these kids, there was a time where you could do that at schools and it wasn't that big of an issue.
Sure.
And he says these are all symptoms of a culture that's ill. I remember after the Parkland thing, I remembered after the March for Our Lives thing, I wondered how many kids, they were running to the government, they were running to the streets to protest, and I asked how many of them are running to the church? How many of them are running to their church or their Bibles? Probably very little of them. They don't think that's the solution. They think the government and new legislation will be the solution. New legislation might solve some of the problems. If you somehow were able to get rid of all the guns in this country, you might be able to stop shootings, even though that's very unlikely, very impossible. But you create other problems, but you're not going to be able to stop killings. As Eric Erickson said in his piece that he wrote earlier, he said, if it isn't a gun, it would be a knife. If it's not a knife, it'd be a car. If not a car, it'd be a homemade pipe bomb. People are desperate to grasp onto something to stop the monstrous kids who storm into schools to gun down their peers. Getting rid of guns is a tangible thing that people think they can do in an age of just do something self-help that would make the situation better. This situation is not getting any better. Ban the guns and the next kid will find a new way to make headlines killing the other kids he hates. Point to other countries all you want with exasperated angst that it doesn't happen there, and you'll be noting that we are not them and our problems are not their problems. Our problem is that you have been at war with God, and what we are seeing is a world where God has handed us over to ourselves. The Bible warns about that. He has removed the protection he once offered, and now we get to see what happens when God turns his back. He's exactly right. He's exactly right. Get rid of one thing, they'll find another way to kill. This kid actually had explosives. They didn't go off, luckily. But this idea that the gun is the only way you can kill someone else. Tell that to Timothy McVeigh. Tell that to the 9/11 attackers. Tell that to the Boston bombers. All right, we're going to move on to the North Korea stuff here very shortly. There's a lot to get to. I want to kind of go over the timeline of events of how we got to today, because President Trump has pulled out of the summit with North Korea. North Korea says they're still open to a meeting. We'll see if this summit, so-called great summit, ever happens. And how do we get those coins? Are those coins now worthless that the Trump administration made that was celebrating the summit? Did you see that, Tom Benson, the coins?
No, this is news here.
You did not see this? Oh, you have to look it up in the break.
They had some coins minted?
Yes, the Trump administration had coins minted and issued for the summit, and it has Trump and Kim Jong-un on the front, and it has about the summit.
Well, let's hope they're not. Let's hope they're not dated.
And it hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're out there. Just Google it in the break. You'll have to see it. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We're on until 9 p.m. tonight, right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. You can make sure to follow me on all of the podcast outlets I'm on. iHeartRadio, Spreaker. I've been adding more content as well. This is not the only show I do. I do the Florida Roundtable. I host the morning show sometimes. I co-host Moment of Clarity with Stefan. I'm going to start doing a podcast specifically online. I'm posting all of those things on my podcast stream to give you guys lots of content so you have stuff to listen to during the week. So make sure to check that out. Just follow me, any podcast outlet, it will be there. So big news as of this morning, President Trump wrote a letter to Kim Jong-un stating that he is going to pull out of the summit. He says, "Dear Mr. Chairman," this is a letter that he put out, "we greatly appreciate your time, patience, and effort with respect to our recent negotiations and discussions relative to a summit long sought by both parties, which was scheduled to take place on June 12th in Singapore. We were informed that the meeting was requested by North Korea, but that is, to us, totally irrelevant. I was very much looking forward to being there with you. Sadly, based on the tremendous anger and open hostility displayed in your most recent statement, I feel it is inappropriate at this time to have this long-planned meeting." I'll read more of that letter later, but that's basically the gist of it. I want to kind of go over the timeline of how all of a sudden we got here. Because it seemed like things were good. People were saying, give Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, we all need to. I was saying, let's hold off a little bit on that. They issued coins, the Trump administration, commemorating the summit, and it hadn't even happened yet. But how did we get to this point where now we're pulling out of the summit? Well, a lot of it started really just like a week or so ago, just in May. Because a couple weeks ago, members of the Trump administration, Pompeo, John Bolton, and others were basically saying that, yeah, we're looking forward to the summit, but we want full denuclearization. Well, then North Korea came out shortly after that, and they said, this was North Korea's first vice foreign minister, said that the country has no interest in a summit with the United States if it's going to be a one-sided affair or it's pressure to give up its nuclear program. That was Wednesday a couple weeks ago. Or was that Wednesday last week? Gosh, time is like, I can't even keep up. I think it was just last week. Yeah, last Wednesday they came out with that. Kim Kai-gwan was the one who made that announcement saying they might pull out of that summit. So there was a lot of people upset over that, but we thought the summit was still going to happen. And then Vice President Mike Pence, earlier this week, went on Fox News with Martha McCallum, and then he made some comments about the North Korea thing that got North Korea upset. This is what he said.
We really hope that Kim Jong-un will seize the opportunity to dismantle his nuclear weapons program and do so by peaceable means. You know, there was some talk about the Libyan model last week. And, you know, as the president made clear, you know, this will only end like the Libyan model ended if Kim Jong-un doesn't make a deal.
Some people saw that as a threat.
Well, I think it's more of a fact.
So he comes out and says, look, if they're not willing to make a deal, it's going to end like the Libyan model. That was when Gaddafi, shortly after Iraq, he said, I'm getting rid of my nukes. I don't want us to be Iraq. He does that. Then a few years later, he's toppled in an uprising in his own country, which the U.S. helped topple him. And so that makes North Korea very nervous when you bring up Libya. So then North Korea responded just a few days ago. Cho Sun-hyu said the North would not beg for a dialogue and warned of nuclear showdown if diplomacy failed. North Korea, they said the vice president's comments were stupid. Cho Sun-hyu, another, he has been involved in several diplomatic interactions with the U.S. over the past decade. She is one of Kim Jong-un's top aides and analysts, and said in the statement, shortly after what Mike Pence said there, says, as a person involved in U.S. affairs, I cannot express my surprise at such ignorant and stupid remarks gushing from the mouth of the U.S. vice president. So we start there. We go to Mike Pence saying his comments. Then North Korea is upset at what Mike Pence said. And so in response to that, Trump comes out today. And Tom Benson, if you can, go ahead and play what Trump said today on this.
I'd like to begin by saying that based on the recent statement of North Korea, I've decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th. While many things can happen and a great opportunity lies ahead potentially, I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world. I've spoken to General Mattis and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and our military, which is by far the most powerful anywhere in the world, that has been greatly enhanced recently, as you all know, is ready if necessary. Likewise, I have spoken to South Korea and Japan, and they are not only ready should foolish or reckless acts be taken by North Korea, but they are willing to shoulder much of the cost of any financial burden, any of the costs associated by the United States in operations if such an unfortunate situation is forced upon us.
So Trump talking today about we're pulling out of the deal, and everyone and all the speculation has been about why the sudden change in North Korea. It seemed like just a few weeks ago, North Korea was so willing to talk
and do anything to get to the table.
They were releasing hostages. Kim Jong-un went to South Korea, crossed the demilitarized zone, went there. They planted a tree together, and they shook hands and all that stuff. And, you know, they've even demolished this nuke test site today. So why the sudden change out of North Korea in recent weeks talking tough against the U.S.? After all this goodwill, after Kim Jong-un, he went to the Olympics. He was willing to have peace. We thought we were close. Why the change? Nobody seems to have a real good answer for this. Most of the answers I hear are, well, this is just what North Korea does. Except there was one piece, didn't get a whole lot of attention, but I think it might be on the money here, by Business Insider. This is what it said. It said Kim Jong-un is said to be worried about North Korea's falling to a military coup while he's rubbing shoulders with Trump in Singapore. It said he's anxious about a summit with the President Trump in Singapore next month, citing sources familiar with preparations. The Washington Post reported Tuesday that Kim Jong was less concerned about the meeting than he was about Kim because he's afraid that there would be a coup attempt when he's gone. The notion that Kim is secure in his power is fundamentally wrong. That's Victor Cha, Director of Asian Affairs for the National Security Council during the George W. Bush administration. He wrote that in a 2014 opinion column. There's one thing that I noticed when I was going through my timeline of North Korea talking tough all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
Both instances, and even today, there was one common denominator, one common factor coming out of North Korea. All that tough talk, none of it was from Kim Jong-un himself. It was always, or his sister, it was always somebody else in the regime, some aide or whatever, commenting on this, talking about it, talking tough. Why has Kim Jong-un not said anything himself? Why is it coming from other people? Does anyone have the answer to that? Why is nobody asking that question?
Has anyone even seen him?
Yeah. Where is Kim Jong-un? I'm not saying he was killed or something. But I think when you read that article I just mentioned, the reason why there has been such a change in North Korea is something is going on in that country that is not not public. And it might possibly be, and Bud actually kind of said this a couple days ago, and I think he's right. There is some internal division in North Korea, it looks like, where there are people in the regime, some hardliners in that communist country, who are not happy with what Kim Jong-un was doing, who are not happy with this talk of peace, who are not happy with possibly negotiating with South Korea and America and maybe letting them in and changing the country. I still believe, and some people don't, maybe I'm wrong, probably am, I guess, but I still believe that Kim Jong-un is very willing to be the guy to denuclearize his country and change the country. Because I think he just wants to be liked. I don't see him as an ideological person. I think he went to the Olympics, or he had sent his sister to the Olympics, and they got so much praise for being there and all this talk of peace, and he went to South Korea and he was applauded. I think that appeals to Kim Jong-un. I think he likes that. And I think he might be willing to negotiate, but I think you have other people in the country, some of these hardliners who are not happy with him and who might be willing to depose him, and there might be some internal division going on in that country that we don't really know all the details about.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be why we're in this situation we're in. And the main two things that tell me that are, one, none of this tough talk in recent weeks has come from Kim Jong-un himself, which is unusual because usually in the past it was him.
And with Trump pulling out, it could be a way to take the pressure off of him.
Oh, maybe. I didn't even think about that. That's possible. I mean, people are saying he's pulling out because North Korea was going to pull out first and we're just trying to be the first ones.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a possibility as well. But there's something going on in that country. the fact that Kim Jong-un is not the one talking, and the fact that he was so afraid of doing the summit that he was going to be deposed, says something unstable is going on in that country that we don't know about. So it's going to be very interesting. There's something deeper here. You know, I'm not usually the guy who says, you know, a lot of times the simplest answer is the best answer.
Where's your tinfoil hat?
Yeah, you know, I'm usually not the guy looking deeper like that, but I think there's possibility something else is going on. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. So Rick Scott, as you know, is running for Senate in Florida. He has been campaigning a lot on the idea of term limits for members of Congress. Usually I hear that and I'm like, yeah, woohoo, term limits. I support you 100% on that. But I wonder if maybe we're too supportive of term limits, and I'll tell you why in a sec. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Michael Yaffee. We got Tom Benson producing as well. One more segment to go here. If you missed any of the show, though, you can check out the show. I'll post it later anywhere podcasts are available. So, Rick Scott, governor of Florida right now, he's running for Florida Senate. He's been supported by Donald Trump and others. He has been campaigning heavily on term limits. In fact, here's one of the commercials that he has been running out there talking about term limits.
There's more than 41,000 zip codes in America. In all but one zip code, they want term limits on Congress. It's common sense. The only place that doesn't want term limits on Congress? Right here, Washington, where all the career politicians are. In Washington, they say term limits can't be done. That's nonsense. We don't work for them. They work for us. I'm Rick Scott. I approve this message. Let's get to work.
All right, so there you go. He's been campaigning heavily on term limits. And the main reason he is doing this is because he's trying to be the guy who is kind of doing what the Trump thing was. He's an outsider, not a typical politician. So that fits the not typical politician line. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be there that long because politicians shouldn't be there that long. And usually I'm with them. I'm like, yeah, and I support term limits. But there was a column in the Orlando Sentinel by the columnist Scott Maxwell. And he's usually pretty liberal. Don't agree with a lot of things he says. But he was saying some things that sparked my interests, put it that way. He was talking about this. He says, on term limits, everyone is wrong. Now, anytime there's someone who's willing to call out all sides, I usually will listen because I find that interesting. Usually they're right on the money. He said, I'm a red-blooded American. I eat hot dogs, drink beer, and watch sports. Obviously, I believe in term limits. Why? Because red-blooded Americans know that politicians are like diapers. They should be changed frequently. Oh. But he says, he then talks about why, maybe campaigning on this is really kind of useless. In fact, he says, the term limit promise is a bunch of malarkey. He uses the word malarkey. That's how serious he is. He says, imposing term limits will require changing the U.S. Constitution, something that simply won't happen. He's basically pointing out that the chances of term limits being pushed through the Constitution anytime soon is not going to happen. Mm-hmm. He says, in fact, the last time the Senate Majority Leader was asked about term limits, he flatly said it would not be on the agenda in the Senate. That Majority Leader was Mitch McConnell, who was still the Majority Leader. He says, so when Scott says he'll impose term limits, he's full of it.
He can't.
But then he goes to this, Scott Maxwell. He says, and every other career politician and term limit opponent who claims America already has term limits, saying they're called elections, that's what Harry Reid said. Mm-hmm. He says, well, that's malarkey again. So he's calling out both sides here. He says, the system is rigged particularly to practically guarantee incumbents re-election. We're talking re-election rates of 95% thanks to unlimited campaign donations, the power incumbents have to force vested interest to cough up the cash, free media, free travel, free taxpayer-funded mailers, and more. He says term limits would change that at least every 12 years. By now, you might be saying, he continues on in the piece, he says, wait, Scott Maxwell, are you saying term limits are the ideal solution? He says, nope. People who say that are full of it too. I used to be one of them. He says, I now know for a fact that term limits don't magically fix things. So do you. Just look at Tallahassee. Here in the state of Florida, our state representatives in Tallahassee have term limits. Florida voters approved legislative term limits in 1992, yet Tallahassee is still one of the swampiest, least responsive, special interest-laden places on the planet, and legislators stay in office bouncing back and forth between the House and Senate. And someone else pointed out to me that Mexico also has term limits, believe it or not, in their government. And obviously they're not doing very well over there. So he says basically everyone in the debate is full of it. The people who claim they work, the people who claim we already have them in the form of elections, and anyone promising to implement them if elected. Now, I actually do think it could solve a lot of the problems because he gives the bad examples. Well, I think one of the good examples of term limits is the presidency. I think implementing term limits for president has been good. I don't really see a downfall to that. He says, but this is what I really like of what Scott Maxwell said, that I really agree with. And this is one of those things that it goes back. You know, I started the show talking about guns, and we were talking about gun control and all that. And I said, the problem isn't guns, the problem is the culture. The problem is us, the people. He's saying that basically here as well when it comes to corruption in Congress. He says the real issue is the caliber of people we elect. If we send spineless weenies to Tallahassee or Washington, it doesn't matter whether they're for 4 years or 40. They're still spineless weenies. He says Scott's campaign says it might not need to amend the U.S. Constitution if it could just get Congress to agree to stop taking salaries after 12 years. Sure, and I could fly to the moon if my tushy would just sprout rocket boosters. He says, listen, if I had to pick one system or the other, I'd probably opt for term limits, if only because we'd get new blood. But I'm going to base my votes on issues such as spending, security, education, and economy and healthcare, matters that will actually be addressed and which, to be fair, might give some voters valid reasons for preferring Scott. But not term limits, and certainly not term limit promises from a candidate backed by career politicians who have vowed to make sure that promise is never fulfilled. So I thought he made an interesting point. And I pointed that out on Twitter. I actually tweeted to him and I said, I actually support term limits, but I also have to admit Scott Maxwell makes some good points in his article. Scott Maxwell responded to me on Twitter. He said, thanks, Michael. Me too, in theory, talking about supporting term limits. He says, but as you could probably tell, I've learned it's not simple. Bottom line, if I had to make a list of the 20 most important issues to base my vote on this or any cycle, this wouldn't even come close to making the cut. So I thought that was interesting. And the main reason I really wanted to focus on that on today's show is because it goes back to the theme at the beginning of the show. Term limits might help fix some of the things on the edges, but it's not going to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the culture. It's us, our laziness, and our inability to elect people in primaries and elections that are right for the job, and to hold them accountable if they do not do the job. I think that's the real message there. All right, I appreciate you listening to the show. If you miss any of the show, make sure to catch out the podcast of the show anywhere that podcasts are available. I also post this week's Florida Roundtable and a lot more on the podcast site, so make sure you check that out. iTunes, anywhere podcasts are available, and we'll be back next week, and I'll catch you guys next time.